Welcome to the Blockbusters and Birdwalks podcast. I am the curator, Garrett Chaffin-Quiray. Today we have a conversation with a friend, Ed Rosa.
That's me. Hi. My filmmaking partner and I have a YouTube channel, Toothless Richard Productions, where you can see a number of our short films.
They really shouldn't hold the Oscars until 10 years or more after those films were released, because so many films that are now regarded as important were overlooked.
The Proposition is a very good movie. We should also say this is an Australian Western. And just like our history of Westerns is trying to figure out how we got to our present based on the history of white colonization of the native lands of North America and South America, etc., this is a similar concern with the way that white people colonized the Aboriginals across the Antipodes. Particular fount this comes from is the musician and sometime writer McCabe.
Yeah, I had no idea going into this that Nick Cave had anything to do with it, and was quite surprised. I'm a fan of his, and as soon as I read that he had written it, I was automatically like, okay, well, because sometimes when you have an artist who's successful in one field and they kind of try to transition into another, sometimes you get mixed results.
Right. Because
I hold Nick Cave in a pretty high regard. He's almost kind of like messianic, like when it comes to his music.
That's the reputation that I understand. He's a figure above others because he's reaching for things others don't reach for and often achieving it, and he has stimulated the right fans, who agree that he's that kind of a person.
Yeah, and there's an emotional honesty and like rawness to what he does. There was a concert film called Distant Sky that Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds was his sort of current band, and they've been together for a long time. It's him and Warren Ellis who are like joined at the hip, and it's truly remarkable. I mean, I've never seen a concert film where two of the performers actually are reduced to tears, like on stage. The rapport he has with his audience is really something rare. I was quite pleased that this wasn't like a misstep or anything. And that his skills at writing and storytelling extend to script writing.
Well, and he's included here, as you mentioned, his partner, Warren Ellis. The pair of them are the composers of this movie. He is the sole writer credit for this movie.
Yeah.
But you hear his voice.
Moving down to the valley, nothing but rocks and dry bones.
That sense of being anchored to something really deep within people, I think, works well in the Western, because so much of what I think a Western really is, and of course this is a big topic that deserves its own many, many hours long conversation, but in brief, it's our present civilization trying to measure how we got here and trying to square the evil of past acts that resulted indeed in good things, and the goodness of past acts that have been forgotten by the evil of the present.
Right.
That's a big statement just to boil around and say that there is no such thing as the great glorious past. So the backstory here is that we have the Burns brothers. Charlie, that's Guy Pearce, he's the middle brother. We have his older brother Arthur, that's Danny Houston. And we have their younger brother, and that's Mike, Richard Wilson. These three Burns brothers run a criminal gang. But Arthur is a psychopath. He'll go over to murder. What has happened before the movie even opens is that Charlie and Mike have separated from their older brother because he is too far out of control even for them as career criminals. They can't stomach what he has done. And what he has done is raid a pioneering household, murdering a mother and a father and their baby after raping the woman who was pregnant.
Right.
The movie then opens where we have kind of the local sheriff, and that's played by Ray Winstone. He's Captain Morris Stanley, who is shooting out Charlie and Mike's splinter gang, killing everybody but Charlie and Mike. And he makes a proposition, thus the title. Stanley tells Charlie, You go find your brother Arthur, and you kill him. And if you do this, I will pardon you and your younger brother and let you go free for your past crimes. You have a certain amount of time to do this, and if you don't, I'm going to kill your brother, and I'm going to come kill you.
Right.
And then I'll kill Arthur. That's the proposition.
That is the proposition, yes.
Now, he's done this without flagging his local authority, who's winningly played briefly by David Wenham from LOTR fame.
Yeah, who's great.
He plays just, a bureaucrat, Eden Fletcher, kind of the DA of the district, who wants things done a certain way but doesn't want to observe how they are done because the frontier is a brutal, ugly place, and it's given over to people like Stanley to execute the requirements of the law. A cat-and-mouse game ensues. Charlie does find Arthur. He doesn't want to kill Arthur. Terrible things are done to Mike. Stanley and Fletcher don't like one another. And Stanley is a married person. His wife, Martha, played by Emily Watson, is slowly learning more about the terrible depravity that her husband holds at bay. And they love each other deeply.
Yeah.
And they're really trying to preserve the possible peace they might have between them in the midst of this terrible madness. And then we have a bounty hunter, Jellin Lamb. That's John Hurt in one of his sort of end-of-career big performances. Movie concludes with, the proposition is fulfilled. Mike has died, Charlie kills Arthur, there's terrible bloodshed, and we don't know really what's going to befall anybody who survives the narrative. What is the right thing to do when terribly violent people are at play in the world? When you are a terribly violent person, but you're fighting your worst instincts.
Right.
Our point of view character is meant to be Guy Pearce's Charlie, but my point of view character is Ray Winstone as Captain Stanley.
I felt the same way.
Stanley's problems are the ones that I'm paying attention to. He suffers from nightmares. He seems to be some kind of a substance addict, probably because he's taking a form of medicine to calm him down. In other words, he's a terribly traumatized person.
Right.
But he's also the guy in charge of the law, which allows him, way on this frontier in a fictionalized town, to be an executioner when necessary, but the judge at all times, and he has the power of the law behind him, so he could pull a gun on anybody and take anybody down. And that must weigh heavily on somebody with a conscience, which is presented in his little frontier home, which is a beautiful little home.
Yeah.
He and Martha keep together. They don't have children. There's no mention that they've tried to or want children or that they can't or whatever, but there's a hint there that they are pretty completely devoted to each other, the words they share, the love that they seem to express, the touching of hands, the way that their little private life works is wonderful until he has to leave their fence line and go to work.
Right.
And then he's a really troubled man because he's forced to do these things which he thinks are awful. But the level of punishment he can mete out on them, complete total justice and death, bothers him because he rubs up against people he doesn't believe deserve that, like the baby Burns brother, who he describes as a simpleton, and we observe as probably a person who might maybe mildly retarded, perhaps we would call him neuroatypical, maybe he's autistic. There's all kinds of things this young man could be,
Right.
but in control of his faculties and understanding the circumstances of what he's dealing with, the boy does not have at all.
Right.
Stanley knows this and feels real misgivings about torturing the kid to motivate the older brother Charlie to go kill their eldest brother Arthur, and so on and so on. That's where I really connected with the movie.
He's the guy whose side we're on.
Right. And I had just recently rewatched The Departed, so I've seen Ray Winstone play a pure supporting role, versus here I would say he's the co-protagonist along with Guy Pearce.
Yeah.
And in that supporting role, and I think that broke him for a lot of American audiences.
Oh, not Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
I don't think that's the one. And I don't think many people went out of their way to go see Sexy Beast or the things that he did before he was involved with The Departed. But the point of raising that specter is those happen within a year of one another. The Departed and this movie, The Proposition. And I just find something about him totally persuasive, completely interesting, physically and otherwise. I dig the guy, but he seems like he's the kind of person, honestly, that I would have been if I was in law enforcement in the 19th century, because I understand what force is, I understand what rules are, and I understand that force can overwhelm rules, but I'm still a rule-abiding person.
Right.
I want them observed.
Right.
And when they're violated, it really makes me mad.
Yeah.
And I want things to be corrected. And I find myself sometimes thinking, I wish I had something I could do to people who violate the rules.
Just don't we all?
But he has that power, 140 years ago in the narrative universe of this movie.
Right.
He can imagine an outcome. Some of the other players around him, his various deputies and so on, they don't have that capability.
No.
They are just dummies looking for a paycheck, a place in the shade, and plenty to drink. People in this drink so much.
Well, it's the Old West. I mean, there was no water.
Just
only whiskey.
Right, it was right. You bathe in the stuff.
Well, not the old American West, but I imagine the old Australian West is the same as the American West.
Lots of similarities.
There's no water. Nobody drinks water.
And this is a desert. It's pictured that way. There is not a lot of vegetation. Yeah, but they're drinking so much. And this was a detail that I think they just got just right. The quantity of insects surrounding these people, feeding on the food that they've cast off because they're slaughtering animals in certain scenes in town. And
how is that not just a wet market? Like, that's probably where COVID came from.
Right.
I mean, in the heat of the Australian outback like that, how are you keeping meat from spoiling instantly?
Yeah. You've got to consume it at the point of killing the creature. And this is before electricity or any of these modern conveniences. And everybody on screen is just sweaty, sweaty, sweaty. It strikes me as true to the discomfort of living there. And nobody seems to like their life, except for a few of the Aboriginal people who we meet. They seem to like their life as long as they're left alone, which, of course, is not really happening in this world. And, of course, the Stanleys. They seem to like their life together, but they do talk wistfully about, wasn't England okay? It was. But it's also not as good as what we remember. They say this to each other.
That's the funny thing about Australia. It seems like, of all the continents, it's like the boss-level continent. Everything there is always trying to kill you.
Bill Bryson writes extensively about that. Yeah,
the only continent that trumps Australia in terms of inhospitability to humans would be Antarctica. But that doesn't count because that's really hard to get to.
Who said the sun that melted the ground? Why said the river that refused to run? Where said the thunder without a sound? Here said the rider and took up his gun.
When this movie's violence jumps off, boy, is it heavy duty. And we get a glimpse of that in the very opening sequence of the movie after a credit sequence, which involves still photographs documenting actual people who lived in Australia during the period that we're talking about. Yeah. And it concludes over the director's credit, John Hillcoat, of 3 deceased people. It looks like a father, a mother, and their infant who have died from head injury. And we're looking at their death photographs.
And there's even a warning about it before the movie starts.
That's right.
Oh, hey, heads up. You're going to see real dead people.
This is some nasty stuff. Pay attention. It goes from that cut, and we're in a violent shootout where Charlie and Mike are eventually captured after returning fire to Stanley and his deputies who have ambushed them in this, in a whorehouse. That's how the movie opens. And then it plods along the way the Westerns do. We've got to set up what the stakes are, what we've got to accomplish, and so on. But heads get blown off. People are speared. There are knife fights. We see the prolonged dying experience in several characters.
Yeah.
They're not just instantly killed and flattened by a single blast of whatever. Here, we linger with people as they lay dying from mortal wounds, and they know it. They give themselves over to conversation. We hear their gasps of pain. It's uncomfortable. In that way, I was reminded of a movie that came out when I was reaching adulthood, which moved me quite terrifically, and that was Unforgiven.
Which is funny because it was that said when I was watching this on Amazon, it said at the end, it said up next.
Oh, Unforgiven. It was trying to feed it to you. That's funny. I saw that connection very clearly because for me, that movie was sort of being a mature Eastwood movie, if we can use that phrase and have it make sense and not be just sort of puerile and silly of us.
Right.
But it is, because it's a reflection on the whole of his career at that point when he was in his early 60s, going back 40 years worth of making Westerns, that here we should maturely look at what the Western means, and that means frequent suffering and the difficulty of surviving this hostile environment when people were mean to each other.
Yeah.
It wasn't just glorious shootouts and wonderful bloodshed and righteous violence done at the behest of the law and goodness and preserving prairie folk. Sometimes it was just nasty business, and it's not done cleanly.
Right.
And so you listen to people suffer.
Nothing was clean.
Right. Which means that, to borrow another phrase, this is a revisionist Western. Again, that demands hours of further conversation.
Right.
And I'm not terribly convinced that we need to actually divide Westerns into those different categorical frames.
You know, shouldn't it be the opposite? It seems to me that, the revisionist Westerns are called so because they are more accurate to the experience and the sort of lack of black and white, but more shades of gray, whereas the more traditional Western that does want to paint everything in black or white, really, those should be considered the revisionist Westerns.
I think you're correct. In the world of film studies, When we say revisionist Western, we are generally talking about the mythologies built in movie Westerns and then therefore inherited by TV Westerns that have inculcated all of us in the fact that this is what the West was like, which is a falsehood.
Right.
The revisionist Western takes or tries to sweep that over to one side and present a more correct, you could say accurate view of what the history of the West was. And we've watched together, for instance, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, which is a great Western.
Yes.
You're right, though. It doesn't revise the actual history. It just tries to make a connection between our present and that past a little more straightforwardly than saying John Wayne and white folks with blue eyes and a fast repeating rifle are the ones who tamed the West from those natives who weren't using the land productively.
Those heathens.
Which is mostly what the West seems to be about for like decades until people said, wait, whoa. That mythology is covering up other historical experiences and realities that we do well to remember. In other words, the DEI stuff that our federal government, led by our new president, does not like.
Our new old president.
Right. Which just strikes me as kind of weird. I'm not looking for 100% accuracy that's verifiable to the level of this is what history really was and we bring along that whole discipline.
Right.
I'm just saying I want to be reminded that the things about our past we don't need to blow through nostalgia and say it was all good and wonderful back then. It's better to say it was as difficult and complicated as our present is. It's just that they had different tools.
Right.
And I want to just experience that with people who live there doing something that I think is interesting and worthwhile. And we arrive at that in this movie in spades.
Yeah.
These people are really struggling with stuff that's worth struggling over. And their answers to the problems they face are not clean, and they don't emerge from it as completely morally pure people on the goodness side of the spectrum.
Right.
But I don't demand that of people. And I like that this movie does not demand it of me as a viewer. The cinematographer, Benoit Delhomme,
it was
really made good images.
Absolutely, yeah. Some of the framing was just gorgeous.
Which is to say that setting it in Australia, where most of these cast and crew members come from, was a great choice.
Yeah.
And then
even though it provided, apparently there was quite a bit of hardship. Making it.
I have to imagine this was a dreadful experience.
Yeah.
In intense heat with all of these wigs and all of this. They have to appear dirty all of the time.
Those bugs are real.
And those bugs are real. What a nuisance that would have been. Sure. But I'm so glad that they accomplished it. So in other words, this movie is rigorously well made, but it frequently is exploring and showing us ugliness. How can that be? How can beauty and ugliness share the same few moments in a sequence?
Right.
Well, they can, because they often do. And there's no reason to rope them off one from the other. There's several moments when Martha Stanley rides into town from her private home. She's in a horse and a buggy, and the people know who she is, and they nod, and they knock their hats to observe her. She's cleaned up. She is the local sheriff's woman. And we see them just all at work, carving animals that they've hunted, fixing the siding of their building. And she's, of course, at the top of that chain. Everybody tithes to pay her husband's salary, and they have a good life which is relatively cush. And it looks beautiful, but it describes really intensely difficult, hard Scrabble work.
Ray Winstone has, he has this line where he's I will civilize this place, and he personally is going to do what it takes to transform this land into
an ordered estate.
Right.
Yeah. This is an old story. This has been told many, many times in different permutations with different cast and crew members. But I think this was really a great meditation on these very issues that I always turn to over and over again. And as I thought back to when this movie happened, this was a Toronto International Film Festival release in the fall of 2005, and it took a while to find distribution. So most people,
it only played like 3 theaters here.
And it was a 2006 release, deep into the year.
Yeah.
But it was swept into a season when it was being released in the late spring of 2006 with 2 movies that were thinking about the sort of big event, 9/11. It was in theaters at the same time as United 93 by Paul Greengrass, and it was in theaters at the same time as the World Trade Center by Oliver Stone.
That's the one with Nicolas Cage?
It is, where he's buried under the rubble of the fallen towers. Now, this movie has nothing to do with those experiences, but those movies, like this one, are really interesting formal exercises in how we can tell a story. This one is the open prairie, which looks marvelous. It's Australia. It's lit and wonderfully produced. Those movies are about restriction into small locations, that are richly produced, trying to explore a mood. And I guess that's the connection that I notice. This is a desperately tragic and difficult story that doesn't leave us with any good answers. World Trade Center and United 93 try to tie off their narratives by reminding us of the goodness of people's capability,
Right.
but it doesn't leave us with a very good feeling. And as I think back to 2005, 2006, when we are then 4 years past the 9/11 experience, we're living in the global war of terror. George Bush is daily raising up the orange or yellow or red warnings, which we don't even know what they mean.
Yeah, blanket alerts.
Blanket alerts. Afghanistan's just going to pot. Iraq is kind of a hot mess. I was too old to be called into service, thank God,
Yeah.
but worried about it. I was a new parent. All of these things were on my mind, and I felt very unsettled about the world around me.
Well, this is kind of the time when, it was no longer too soon. You
Yeah, you
to
could-
deal with this, because I remember when United 93 and World Trade Center came out, these were really the first pop
Mainstream
cultural
movies,
things
right.
to actually deal with that, with 9/11. And I remember wondering to myself, like, are we... Because on some level, we're trying to, as a culture, as a society, sort of work through this tragedy. Then again, these are also like financial, these are, basically financial ventures, at least for the people who are providing the money to make the movies.
Yeah.
I remember being acutely aware that, okay, we as a society have now hit this point where we've decided it's been enough time, let's start.
We can merchandise the pain of the past.
Right.
This is an opportunity to earn a buck and maybe say something important.
Right.
But I went into each of these three movies thinking, I am going to be unsettled. That's the purpose of this movie. And I need to be prepared for that and sink into that mood, which is not always the mood a person has when they go to the show. For example, the same season that this movie was released, Cars was in theaters. And that's a different mood altogether. I took my kid to go see it. We had a great time, but that's a different kind of a closed, optimistic experience.
Kind of antithetical.
It is. And I connect these three movies, in my mind at least, because they explore and settle into the discomfort of a discomforting bit of history. In this fantasized version of the Australian 1880s, we're looking at the yoke of white folk trying to deal with other terrible white folk while running roughshod over native people and the general ecological environment and laying waste to everything they possibly can before they kill each other and result in something like a temporary peace.
Right.
Is that a good outcome? Well, it's truthful,
Yeah.
but it does suit a mood, and this movie delivered on that. In the same way that United 93, we're going to watch a plane full of civilians deal with terrorists and die? Yep, yeah, that's what we're going to do. Yep.
Yeah.
World Trade Center, we're going to watch a transit cop get buried under a building
Right.
and wait while his body is crushed with his best friend yards away, and they can do nothing to help each other but wait for Michael Shannon to come save them?
Right.
What? Yep, that's what we're going to do. And each of these movies is unsettling. And that unsettling feeling, it has its place at the table.
Clean hands and dirty hands, brown eyes and blue. Pale cheeks and rosy cheeks, Jesus loves you.
This is Blockbusters and Birdwalks, a conversation between Garrett Chaffin-Quiray and
Ed Rosa.
Boop Boobity Doo.